Both.
No, this is too bright. We'll keep it like this. We still have incandescent light. So,
Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Talks, while we adjust our lighting and ask each other how we look. My name's Malayna. I'm here with Reverend Mike McMorrow and Salaam Thompson as we embark on another exploration of culture and perspectives on
sure.
culture. And we're always really happy to hear Salam's perspective, because not only was he raised in Chicago and, came up through Catholic school, and the Nation of Islam impacted his youth, and it's still impacting his life. We have you have such a multifaceted perspective in so many ways that I'm finding it like a masterclass, and I go and research things after, take notes. And so in the last episodes,
Thank you.
I put in little factoids in between so people could look up more or learn more.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank
I
you
definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I've had, just looking back, and I've talked to, cross-check this with friends of mine that I still keep in contact with, who they live outside of Chicago now in DeKalb, but we grew up on the same block, literally. So everything that I talked about, in the talk last week, he's like, "Yeah, I remember," and maybe one day, if time allows and things is feasible, I bring him aboard. So just so the audience out there can know that I'm just not, blowing smoke. That what I'm saying is really accurate, But
we
I.
believe you.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I always felt like water. You know what I mean? And water, it bends around whatever object is in front of it, so it's very liquid. So it'll flow straight if it's wide open. If you put anything in front of it, it'll just adjust naturally and just go around. So I always
Mhm.
had this fluidity to move in these different circles. But what I often found is the circles that I moved in never intersected with each other. I
Yeah.
was the only dynamic link between those circles.
Hmm.
And if I were to bring a person from here and a person from here, they don't know how to talk with one another or relate to one another. But I just found it naturally easy to just kind of blend, like, so I can sit with nerds, if you will. I can sit with, like the couple of friends from high school where we embarked on our journey together in Islam. The word was out that they called our table the knowledge table. Don't go over there unless you're ready to talk. That's the knowledge table right there. That kind of thing. And one of the guys, that he was one of my teammates in high school in basketball. He ended up playing and had a successful career in the NBA. He won a national championship in Kentucky in '96, and he won the championship with Shaq and Dwayne Wade in Miami. Antoine Walker. I remember in high school, my friend and I were leaving the table, and he was there. He was, at the time, he was like 6'7", 6'8", and I was still maybe 6'4", 6'5", so I didn't catch that extra 3 inches until after high school. And so I remember him sitting there like chowing away at some pancakes, this huge stack of pancakes, and he had a plate of bacon. And so I went over there, I looked at the bacon, I looked at him and just laughed. But my friend, he picked up the plate of bacon and he acted like he was going to throw it in the trash. And then he just munched on his pancakes. He said, "That's a problem, as long as you reimburse me." But it was all like fun. But we had that kind of respect. So even like I, as a basketball player on a basketball team, I could mingle with that crowd and talk sports and fire off every kind of sports stat and Major League Baseball history, basketball, football, whatever, and then turn around and pick up a newspaper or pick up, a book, case in point,
Right.
what's around me, or, turn around and listen to, hip hop at the time, which was very big. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just fascinating to be able to just move in those settings. And that even was a source of survival coming
Yes.
home from school, right? So when I'm in Catholic school, I'm not. There's no bullets flying in the school hall. Obviously, nobody brought guns to our school, but the friends of mine who were on the block when they went to public school, they were walking through metal detectors every day. It was like
Mm.
prison, and they would see me. I stuck out like a sore thumb in the hood, so our dress code was business casual. So just like we would show up to the office on the Monday through Thursday for business professional wear, that's the way we had to dress in Catholic school. So they see you, you stick out like a sore thumb. They're like, "Oh, you're a Catholic kid. What's going on?" That kind of thing. But I mean, they would give me shit, but at the same time, the ones that knew me, even though they gave me shit, they didn't let anything happen to me.
Right.
And so they
Well,
were,
when you
yeah.
talk about survival,
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of recent takes on the theory of Darwinism. They
Yes,
say survival of the fittest, but now it seems that it's actually survival of the friendliest, the most
it is.
adaptable, the one
Hmm.
who's able to cooperate with their environment the best.
Yeah,
And so you're living
absolutely.
proof.
Yeah, I mean, because I remember in Chicago, it was very customary if you're in a neighborhood, or even if you're in a neighborhood, your own neighborhood, or in other neighborhoods you don't know, it's customary to walk in the middle of the street when you're down the block. You don't
Hmm.
walk on the sidewalks
Hmm.
because you had to have your head on a swivel to see where is it coming from. You know what I mean? So
Wow.
you know how to react. But if you were walking in front of somebody's house and nobody know you, good luck. If you were
Wow.
driving on the street there and nobody recognized your car, your car might be decorated with a few shells of 38s on your way out. I mean, if they didn't know you, you were pretty much a target at that point.
Yeah, and I know that there are neighborhoods in Los Angeles that you
Hmm.
have to be aware of that as well. If
Oh
you
yeah,
turn
Nickerson
down the wrong
Gardens,
street.
Grape Street, the jungle, I
Hmm.
mean, and I share a lot of stories with a lot of the guys who grew up here,
Hmm.
and one of the guys I talked to, I have him on my Facebook list, and he said, yeah, all hoods are the same. It's just LA's hoods is just prettier. Yeah, I mean, like I can literally when I moved out here and I saw like some of the roughest parts of the valley that I wouldn't dare dream of raising a family there now. But when I first got here, compared to what I had in Chicago, I'm like, shit, this is good, But
Wow.
and so you could like I'm like, oh, look at the sunset, but yet you're in the middle of the barrio. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So you
Yeah.
could take a picture and send it back, and I'm sending it back home, and they go, well what's this? That kind of thing. So it's all about perspective. I mean, believe it or not, I mean Inglewood, where I'm from in Chicago, the net income, the average net income was about $10,000 annually. So
Wow.
you're talking about extreme destitution. You're talking extreme poverty. When I looked last time I looked up for Compton, it was like 40,000. But Compton
Wow.
has its own city municipality.
Hmm.
Inglewood did not. You know what I mean? So Compton has its own mayor.
Right.
Inglewood does not. So we
Mm.
had in Chicago aldermen who were equivalent to city councilmen, here, but it's the only city I've ever come across who had aldermen. But
Hmm.
that's just been, the nature of the beast. But all that to say that this right here saved me a lot of ass whoopings, and the one that I mean, you had to be able to literally talk your way out of an ass whooping, pretty
Yeah.
much, and you had just talking guys, like who were ready to just either come to blows or go pop the trunk or something like that. I mean, you couldn't even, you had to like throw basketball games on the court basically because okay, we had to think that, okay, if we run these guys into the ground, he's going to go to his trunk and he's going to come back for every one of us. So I remember the five of us, we had a plan and we ran the play to perfection. And I said, okay, the three of us are going to run this play. You grab our keys that's right behind the basket. You grab our ball. As soon as we score this bucket, we're getting the hell out of
Wow.
but that's the kind of living it was, and God forbid if you turned an ankle, going forward. So
Wow.
thankfully that didn't happen. But I've been chased out of different neighborhoods. You probably heard of Cicero, Illinois. I think I've mentioned Cicero. That's where there used to be housing riots, riots in the 50s. The Cicero riot of 1951 that
Okay.
happened basically, when someone is calling the wrong side of town. Marquette Park, that's where I mentioned Dr. King in 1966. A white resident, threw a brick upside his head and brought him down to his knee. And it got him into a car and got out of there. And I drove my kids through there, and it looks nothing like then. And to frame the story for them, I said, you know what, 40 years prior to us driving down here, if you were caught dead over here, if you were black, they're flipping your car over. They're setting it
Wow.
afire. So Chicago has a lot of the historical racial boundaries that
Yeah.
just quite hasn't blended. Unfortunately, even through
Yeah.
gentrification and things like that. We used to see the only time we saw white people in our on our block was when either they were cops or firefighters or paramedics, or if it were motorists who were coming to park they'll park their cars at like 10 in the morning on a Sunday summer morning, and then go to the police station, do their transaction, bill or whatever it is that they're doing, and they
Hmm.
were gone by 3. So by the
Hmm.
time everyone was hitting the streets, they were out of there. So that was the only time that I've ever seen white people in the area. So to a
Wow.
lot of other my peers who grew up there, it would be a cultural shock to them to put them in white spaces. Like I know guys who I would be cool with now who probably couldn't even sit here and carry this conversation with you without some sort of contentiousness in their heart for white folk.
Hmm.
And but looking at it where it's coming from, that's not how I think, but I can understand what births it, because
Yeah.
when you're hurt people, and the old saying is hurt people,
Yeah.
and no matter like if you come in and say, hey, I'm your friend, I'm not here to harm you, and it's like this emotional withdrawal where you just have to get this rage out. Well, I don't care, I hate you, that kind of thing. You just is really like cathartic in a negative way. You know what I mean? Where that rage and things like that is out. Where I mean, I look at things like ever since I've moved away, look at things like, okay, the food that's in the area, okay, the environmental issues in the area. Even though we didn't have the wherewithal to focus on the environmental issues that were plaguing us, clean air, clean water, having landfills in the neighborhood and things like that gave off radioactive waste that caused cancer and things like that.
Did you
Uh,
have
uh,
that in
no,
your
no,
neighborhood?
we had that in the hoods in Chicago. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And these are one of the things that a few years ago, Aaron Brockovich and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I believe, it was going around the country giving talks. In fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was in talks with ministers from the Nation of Islam about the dangers of vaccinations a few years ago. So like that was a interesting yet symbiotic relationship from someone like RFK Jr., who had a extreme background in environmentalism, and he's an advocate for that. And then him speaking with, he's formerly known as Minister Tony Muhammad of the mosque number 27 in Los Angeles on Vermont here. And
Okay.
then there's the leading mathematician for the Nation of Islam, Dr. Wesley Muhammad. So both of
Hmm.
them have been a wealth of information as far as the effects of vaccines. and the effects of that environmental warfare that's going on, that basically is a war against black men and black boys. Really, that it. I'll what I'll do is I'll give you a lecture that Dr. Wesley Muhammad did. And in fact, it might be good research material, because I want people to watch that. And he very specifically documents everything and cross references things, has a robust bibliography to all of the research that he did. And
Yeah, because
that's
I am not aware of this at all. I'm
yeah, he
surprised
talked
to hear
about,
you
yeah,
mention it.
one of the things he spoke about was how they laced the weed that I never touched the stuff, but many of my peers have a
Okay.
smoke in the hood, that stuff, like affects reproductive organs, things like that. It
Okay.
creates feminine traits in boys and men. So he has some empirical evidence that supports that as well. So
Wow,
yeah.
dude. Well, I
I
mean,
think I think that I think I had some of that weed too, though. So,
I'm
so let
trying
me ask
to
you
like tie
something.
this back into the Sunday topic, which was basically about the flowers in the garden. So I guess there's weeds
Yeah,
too.
There it
wild,
is. There's the soil.
wild wood
So
weed. So,
Yeah.
so I want
go
to back
ahead.
up just a little bit, Salaam, because you were talking about your some of your buddies who
Hmm.
would have difficulty in this kind of speaking this openly.
Yeah,
So, what
absolutely.
what do you think is because I think part of what's going on here, I think, with the what do we want to call it, the bridging the gap to where we
Yeah,
realize in reality diversity and inclusion is it seems like there's a level of distrust
oh,
that has
absolutely,
to
yes.
be bridged. So how did that happen for you? And uh, not that you can generalize what other black men's experience would be, but if you have a sense of what that would be, generally speaking.
I think one part of the preparation with that was my high school. So at my high school, Mount Carmel in Chicago, we had 220 seniors in my senior class, but only 36 of us were black. So we had no faculty that had any black representation. That didn't occur till a few years after we left. And when I say few, I'm talking like two or three, where they even had one brother there with dreads teaching U.S. history, from what I understood. And the only black folks that were in, faculty, if you call it that, or positions of authority, or for the lack of a better role, an adult. The only ones that we saw there were the cooks who were in the cafeteria and the janitor named Rory. So we had this problem also where I grew up on the block, but we also had it in the school in an education setting, but in a surrounded and under a fishbowl by white observers, our white peers, who we went to school with, and white faculty who we went to school. Basically, were watching how we did things in this fishbowl, and we were pretty much, speaking of fishbowl, we were walking around, figuratively speaking, playing go fish with each other, and we were bartering like traits of transitional manhood, like boy to man. Like, okay, you know how to talk professionally. Okay, let me borrow that from you. I know how to, like, I don't know, build something, or I know I have a sense of what manhood looks like, or I saw an uncle, or here's some game I can show you about women, or whatever it is. Well, you're basically like bartering different traits and piecemealing a road for yourself to trail on from this teenage boy with raging hormones to manhood. So you didn't really have that example. So it was tribal in that sense. But the distrust with a faculty came, I think it's a lot of it is inherent in bias. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had some great teachers. And one of them, he recommended, with my senior year, he said that I considered going into journalism. And he said, I think you make a damn great journalist. And well, that's one of the two regrets that I have in my life. I wish I'd listened to him. Things would be a little bit more natural. It'd be a more natural space for me. But it's never too late, starting with this, right? So that was one of the few times, along with my basketball coach. My basketball coach is a great guy, and we started off rocky. But then when he understood like what my background was, like losing my parents, because I didn't go around with a sign like saying, "Hi, I'm orphan." At 12, I lost my parents. I didn't go around with that. Only certain people who were close to me knew that. And then so when people will either like bag on you about how dirty your clothes were, or how you never had any money, or your shoes wasn't up to par, whatever, then they end up feeling like shit later on when they found out that what I actually went through and what my story was. But only like three people at best knew that, and then word started getting around. And then as time went on, things became easier, and even in my somewhat unkeptness by comparison to a lot of well-off kids that I went to school with, things got easier because they had context behind why I was showing up to school looking a certain way. I mean, if you don't have gas on and no lights, I mean, that's what's gonna happen. So, and I've had. My trigonometry teacher, her name is Sister Hurley. I put it out there. This actually happened. She had gave a homework assignment, my junior year, and said to bring 5 cans of food. Okay, she didn't know this was during Thanksgiving food drive, and which is prevalent in Catholic schools and Catholic parishes and so forth. She didn't know my surroundings, so I give her that, right? So I came the next day, and I didn't have any food. Hell, I go to bed with a bag of chips. You know what I'm saying? So when I show up to
could have qualified for the food.
right, I mean, like, yeah, I would have been a recipient. Little did they know, but because I showed up at a prestigious Catholic school because my mother wanted me to go there and finish there. They're thinking that I came from the same means that they came from, and that certainly wasn't the case. So when I came back to school the next day, and Sister Hurley asked me, "So the Mr. Thompson, do you have your 5 cans of food?" I said, "I'm sorry, I don't." And then she said, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." And I said, "Ain't that about a bitch? I mean, like, you don't even know me. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you didn't know the fact that I'm going to sleep in my winter coat, the same winter coat you saw me walk through the door in, is my blanket, my comforter at night." I said, "You don't even know who the hell I am. You know what I mean?" So that one stung, and I can look back on it now with some degree of perspective. That yeah, she didn't know, but that one hit hard. It angered me. So when email became a thing, I fired off an email to her. I never got a response. When I was an adult now, I said, "Do you remember when this happened?" I said, "Did you not know that I was like when Jesus said the poor may be among you always, that I was the poor that was in your midst? Did you not know that?" And so I never got a response, and I wasn't really expecting that, but it at least was therapeutic for me that to get that off to her. And I know she got it because she didn't retire until several years after that. So that's fine. That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. And the thing
But
is,
that
I
also
love the
shows
yes.
your level of that you've blended in enough with your surroundings that she
Hmm.
assumed that you had the same
Absolutely.
means. So that's just
So I
like,
probably could have fooled her,
yeah,
just
it's
looking
the
at it,
flip side
yeah,
of
giving her a little bit of
passing.
benefit of the doubt. Yeah, I fooled her.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, and the thing that sucked about it is I loved her method of teaching.
Mm.
Like she can take trigonometric concepts and break them down to rudimentary piecemeal nuggets like
Mhm.
any math teacher I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And that actually played a role in my analytical mind and applying principles of math to what I think, because I use mathematics as a cross reference. Okay, do I feel this way about this certain item right here? Okay, what if
Mhm.
I compare it to this natural law of math and science phenomena? Does it still come out in the wash? And I can
Mhm.
credit that to her, you know what I mean? But unfortunately, we never got to have um, that kind of conversation, that pretty red bow to that conversation because of
Yeah.
this scarring. You know,
Mhm.
that's the sad part. And
Yeah,
if
but you also didn't generalize that to all white people, though.
correct, that's
Well,
correct. Yes.
that's kind of what I'm asking. Do you think that's just a um, like? Is that a what sets you apart that way? Do you think, or maybe do you think it's an ability to be able to uh, empathize with others, like to put yourself in their shoes, kind of thing?
I think it was. And I have a story to tell about that. I'm gonna get to shortly. If someone can remind me, one of the guys that I went to high school, I graduated with in high school. He became a cop, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think what it is that poverty is not so much a humbling thing. It's like a really humiliating thing. And you know, when you look at these commercials that show these malnourished children in other parts of the world, or even if if CNN were to do like an expose in the inner city, like in New York or Chicago or LA or whatever, and just to see the sullen spirit on a kid, yeah, that it's like, damn, you asking me to focus on uh, my reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I can't even put food in my belly. You
Right.
know what I mean? Or I like in my case, I had to like take easier classes and say to hell with them when I was study because I took advantage of the sunlight to study my hardest classes at home because we didn't have lights at home. So I knew where when the sun was going about to go set. I made sure that I hammered out the hardest classes under the sunlight before it passed, and then I would just wing it on the easier stuff that I can finish at breakfast time at school or something like that, or something on the bus or cram session. So I think what my English teacher recommended I be a journalist caught wind of that, but he never said nothing to me. But he caught wind of it because he said to me, he said, like, look, did a crappy job on your first draft and on answering these questions, kind of thing. But then you turn in this paper that's like, you know, A plus work. It's like, what the hell are you? You know, that kind of thing. And it's like if you may have a coach, and then the coach wants you to play a certain way, you know, but then you're this athlete that has this natural talent. And they say, no, 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 don't do the behind the back stuff. Just make a simple chest pass like I taught you to do. That kid is talented. Sometimes you just gotta let that kid just go and
Yeah.
to make up your plays for the other kids who don't have that talent. And that way you try to blend them together. That's what coaching is. And I think as a teacher, he could have gotten frustrated with my ability to just fire off a 750 word essay like that. You know, that was just a gift I've always had. And even though I let my English grades suffer for, but when it came time to term papers, I was busting their ass, you know, the term papers. You know, they just didn't know where it was coming from, that kind of thing. So um, when I saw that element of humanity come from him to at least try to relate to me and
Mhm.
like try to, let's say, point me in a direction, I had a greater respect, you know, for that teacher. But in that space when I left school and take the bus home to the hood, I have the only case studies for black-white relations I have is with the damn police, unfortunately. And, like I mentioned a few weeks ago on our talk session, generally when you live in close proximity to a police station, that neighborhood, it would stand to reason to have homes with tax bases that are elevated in nature, not depressed. Those areas usually aren't depressed. In California, a lot of cops live in Simi Valley. Simi Valley has its own police department. And then we're flanked here by Mission Hills and Devonshire, right? So generally it stands to reason that the area in betwixt the two are going to be elevated in price, because you think with the presence of a police station, you're thinking automatically safety, reduction in crime, greater rapport with police and so on and so forth. We had a rapport with the police, all right, but a lot of those dudes, I've seen even some rogue black cops. And I remember seeing a black cop that would come by. We had a basket right on around the corner from where I live, and we would play, street ball basically. And he would come out and he would shoot the ball. And then one of the gangbangers, he talked so much shit to him, and then he said, "You know what? I had enough of you." He gave his partner. He took off his gun belt, gave it to his partner, took a couple of buttons down off his shirt. He reached in the glove compartment, grabbed some black gloves. He said, "Come on, let's do this." And I swear to God, I've never witnessed a hand-to-hand ass whooping like that ever. And so then when he was finished, he said, "Okay, so we don't have any problems? We're good now, right? Okay, you're going to give me my respect when I come around here, right?" And he was done. So that kind of street justice was still prevalent and still in the embodiment of an officer behind a blue uniform. You know what I mean? So like he never forgot that he came up in the streets, even though he's on the other side of the law. So he was he still had it in him. I mean, there was a black officer who was part of the Panther raids that was spoken of negatively. His name was James Gloves Davis. I think he passed away a few years ago. But that's going off into another topic. But that's something for somebody to chew on. But we had those kind of contentious relationships where the cops they would let the drug dealers sell the dope, and as long as they were getting a cut off of it, no problem. But anytime, like when I would see a raid happen, and then you think, "Oh, damn, they're gonna take so and so, and he gonna be gone for a minute." And 2 hours later, you look at the clock, he right back on the block again. And I said, "Oh, okay." So usually when you see stuff like that, that means that number one, they're using you, and number two, you have more intrinsic value to them out here on the streets than you do over there behind a wall. And so that's how you could tell that there's some kind of cahoots thing that was always like going on. You know what I mean? So you had that kind of dynamic as well. So in addition to living in depressed conditions, you also had folks who were supposed to uphold the law, that had the option to eschew that responsibility and make advantages for themselves while they were on duty. I mean, so it's been many times where guys would get picked up by the cops. They'll take you for a ride, ask you a series of questions. This never happened to me, but I know folks who it has happened to. And these folks would be like gangster disciples, or for the most part, all of us knew gangster disciples in our immediate area. All of us knew black disciples in our immediate area. So we were the baby who had been thrown out with the bathwater because of proximity and because of familiarity. So it could have been any one of us in that back seat. And then they'll threaten you if you don't give them the information that you want. They'll go right to the middle of the block, open up the paddy wagon, and there'll be a bunch of guys out there waiting for them to drop you off with no shoes. And that's a
they dropped you
bad
off
story.
with no shoes?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so
They
they'll
took
drop
your
you off. What's that?
Did they take your shoes from
They
you?
would take your shoes and say, "Good luck getting home." Yeah. And so many times, like I live in Inglewood, the Bridgeport area is near where White Sox Park is. It used to be called Comiskey Park. And once upon a time, and it's probably still like that today, Bridgeport never been friendly to black people. So as long as you were on the east side of the Interstate 94, which is the Dan Ryan Expressway, that was the black part of 35th Street, where 35th Street is where White Sox Park is. Anything west of that, you better not get caught up over there. So there's been many of stories over there where black teenagers that end up with comas and concussions and things like that, just being caught in the wrong part of town. And a lot of times, the police were accessories to creating those kind of negative and tragic outcomes too.
So what about your friend who became a cop? Was he
Yeah,
from your
okay.
neighborhood?
Glad you reminded me. Well, okay, I won't say his name, but I'm gonna tell you something. This fella, he transferred to Mount Carmel when we were seniors. Okay, I remember we had to go on what's called a Kairos retreat. Basically, it's for seniors. We got a chance to go and spend 3 days at the University of Notre Dame's campus, right? And so it was a time of reflection, a time, basically like you're bonding with your classmates. You're like basically finding out more about your classmates, about each other that you wouldn't have found out in normalized settings. So I shared a bunk with this guy. He was cool as a fan. He was a really good, cool dude, and I like he would tell me stories about his upbringing over in Beverly and Mount Prospect area, where there's a lot of Irish folks, that's over there. And I would tell him about my upbringing in Inglewood, where it was 95, 90, 98% black. And gave him, told him a couple of examples of a couple of white kids that grew up in the neighborhood as well, that have since moved away. But for the most part, our neighborhood been blackety black, is what it was. So we shared, stories, going back and forth, and shared a room. All that. He was a really nice guy. But then I remember he said when we were one night when we were chopping it up, he said one day I'm going to be a cop, just like I couldn't remember if it was his uncle or something like that. His uncle was a cop in the '60s, and he showed me a picture. And if you Google the picture of the 4 or 5 officers who were bringing out the Black Panther, Fred Hampton's body after they assassinated him in December of 1969, he showed me a picture and he pointed out his uncle. At the time, though, when he pointed it out to me, I didn't know that that was the Black Panther raid that everyone was talking about. I knew of the raid because everybody talked about it in chatter throughout the hood, right? But
Mhm.
it wasn't until I started studying the Black Panthers more copiously as a young adult, and then when I saw that picture, in newspaper, excerpts and accounts and things like that, I said, "Wait a damn it, that's the picture that I won't say his name showed me when we were at Notre Dame."
Hmm.
And I said, "Damn." And so then thank God to technology, I started doing thumb wrestling on the phone. So I started doing let my fingers do the walking, doing some Googling. I look up the kid's name that was in the same room with me, cool as a fan. He's a Chicago police officer, right? He had 16 counts of excessive force on his record. And then it had a map of it, right? Looked on the map, 2 to 3 to 4 blocks from my doorstep. So and I just thought about, damn, I told you about where I came from, and I was just thinking, like, just how close that could have been. What if I was unfortunate to not get out of there and get to California, right? Hell, it could have been me. It could have been
Yeah.
me who you busting in my mouth and busting upside my head and going on concrete and things like that. And I've been stopped by my first negative encounter with police was when I was 11 years old, and that happened as a that's kind of like the rite of passage of a black boy growing up in a hood with contentious relationships, with police, and being that those were the only white people that you generally saw. Yeah, until like if you went to Catholic school, because a lot of folks couldn't afford it, and hell, we couldn't either, but we forced the issue. That's what my mom wanted. I had white teachers, white coaches, white dean of students, so white guidance counselors. So I was able to get a lot of practice in my interaction
So
with whites
you
and
feel,
diction and all that stuff.
do
Yeah, so it carried over into adult life.
I'm just curious if you felt safe in those white spaces as a young kid.
That's a good question. I want to say physically safe, yeah, I did. Psychologically, no, not by a long shot, because you're sitting in the class where your blackness is under siege by what's being taught to you every day.
Right,
And being that I went to a Catholic school, you're under siege not just historically, but theologically.
right,
So and from the science of mind teachings that the law of unconscious mind is what you keep repeatedly putting in front of the mind. That's what's going to program the mind. So that calibration psychologically,
right.
you can come out of there in pretty bad shape and
Yeah,
hating
there
yourself.
has been a cultural breakdown,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we're trying to address now. I mean, we're really,
Yes.
in many ways, just starting to address the conversation. But what
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about is if part of this, addressing this in areas like Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
like Compton, uh, and I don't know exactly the answer to this. I mean, they've tried doing that with busing, but
Yeah,
that basically just stirred up a bunch of resentment.
it sure did.
I'm sure the black kids who get bused at Taft would just as soon stay home,
Yeah.
right? But but creating, I guess what I'm getting at is learning how to be, uh, how to move in these spaces where white folk can move in black spaces and feel comfortable, and vice versa. Because it seems like it's usually, correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it's usually black folk visiting white spaces rather than white folk
Bingo.
visiting black spaces, right?
You hit the nail right on the head. And as
Yeah,
I think a few weeks ago I mentioned this, that generally when we talk about or when you hear white analysts or authority figures, for lack of a better term, say, we're the all one human race. Let's all come together and be one big human family.
right.
Well, like I mentioned to you about math, when you have one integer and you multiply by another integer, you have a product. And a product is the noun for the verb of produce. So when you multiply something, you're producing something. So when you're like multiplying, okay, all these different existences, what are you producing? And then what is the ecosystem in which what you're producing is going to be housed? Because generally, when it's like, it's easy for folks to say, lay in the cut in the suburbs and say, yeah, I have a drink with a black person, but the onus is on that black person to navigate his way or her way through the Tetris maze of all these booby traps that society has for you to even make it to the damn bar stool to enjoy get a chance to clink the mug with you, have a drink. You know what I'm saying? But there's little to no effort that a white person has to make. Not saying, I'm not really going at whether they're willing to make it, because I think it's a little subjective. But the way the game is set up, they don't have to make these sacrifices and concessions to go into black spaces to interact with them. They don't have to generally do that. The only time I see that as an exception is if you have something like, I don't know if you all remember the movie Dangerous Minds. I think Michelle Pfeiffer or something like that, where you have this white savior complex where like you have this dainty, pretty Michelle Pfeiffer that she has to teach these menacing black young teenagers. You know what I mean? And basically teaching that kind of has a kind of negative connotation to it because it has what they call the white savior complex associated with it. So you don't see like you see black leaving their areas of comfortability, to go into spaces where they're not comfortable at all, number one. Number two, there's no one to mentor them in those spaces. In fact, even if you run across another black face in that white space and to try and seek mentorship from them, you're looking like the one brother that was on Get Out who was standing there laying in the cut with leaky eyes throughout the whole movie. And he was like a shell of himself. And, it's like, dude, hello, I'm here. And like, but you're in these spaces where if you can't function, I mean, that's really an attack on your mental health, really. If you're constantly like I mentioned, those 9 columns, that Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, the late great Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, wrote about in her book, The Ice Papers. Maybe I should have had her book out here. I'll be sure to have it out here next time. But she talked about the 9 columns, and she talked about education, economics, and entertainment, labor, law, and politics, religion, sex, and war. If you can go through all 9 of those columns, and you have where you're coming out, white is on top and black is taking the L in every single arena, you're going to come out of there crazy as hell. You're like, damn, I can't take this. It's just not mentally healthy, for you. So for black folks that have to make this trail of tears into white spaces to relate to white people, then what happens is when that black person goes back amongst his people, now you have elements of division amongst his people. Oh, you talking white now. Oh, you think you better than us now. Oh, you go. Oh, Salaam, what's up with your vocabulary, dog? You act like you ain't from 61st Street no more, homie. What's up with you? So you ain't be talking all educated up around here with me. I mean, that's the way. These are the type of onslaughts that we have. So truly,
even within the community, adjustments have to be made.
So you have guys like myself who have a trademark before you become an enigma. So I know we may say in terms of endearment, oh, my nigga, what's up? I say my enigma, because you don't have a home. You know what I mean? So you don't have a home amongst your own, and you don't have a home, or certainly amongst white, because by the time it's sundown, they want you to get the hell out of there. So and another thing is those relations that may be however congenial they may be, they get tested. And they get tested when you move in next door. And they get tested when they're dating your daughter or your son. And they get tested when you have a Sidney Poitier moment and guess who's coming to dinner. And they're like, damn, I like you, but I don't want to eat with you. You can't come to my dinner table. So that's the sentiment that it has. So it almost borderlines on tolerance than it does acceptance. And speaking of tolerance, that's my problem with tolerance, like the Museum of Tolerance. Like if I can function right now, if I have a slight headache or something like that, and I can function, okay. But you better believe I get my hands on my Excedrin, and pop it, I want the headache gone. You know what I'm saying? So like tolerance is like giving a pass, but not full on acceptance. It's like, I'm going to allow you to be here. And within tolerance, you don't really have any value because what's given to you can easily be taketh away. It's like they say, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And so that's the challenge in these spaces. So because it's like, yeah, we'll play a game with you, but you got to come on the road. We got home court advantage. And black people have to constantly have our road jerseys tucked. We're constantly the ones that have the lower seed. We're constantly the ones that have to shoot at a moving basket with people yelling and screaming. You know, so like we're the ones that's having people jeering at us. And in fact, I'll tell you something. One of my high school games, okay, that I remember we played in. We played at Anderson, Indiana, at the Wigwam, and maybe one day I have one of my teammates on here to support what I'm saying. And I remember this is in the middle of Anderson, Indiana. That gymnasium had to hold 6,000 people, it was the largest crowd we ever played in front of. And Indiana basketball is God. And also Indiana, even though the KKK was founded in Tennessee, Indiana at that time per capita is probably still the same, had the largest concentration of Klan members, in that state. So when you have Mount Carmel, when you're on the surface, you're thinking, oh, that's some suburban schools known for football, they're mostly white. But then you see all the brothers running out of the tunnel and then throwing windmill dunks and things like that. Then you say, well, damn, where all these ends come from? You know what I mean? So then they're calling you names. The guy that I mentioned that played in the NBA was one of my teammates. Every time he caught the ball at another school, we played Brother Rice, the crowd would chant "Hooked on Phonics" with the five clap to it. Every time he caught the ball. And these are not just like teenagers, not a peer. These are grown ass white men and women that are doing this shit. You know what I mean? So here we are, 16 and 17. So that's why we were as tight as we were. But I know I'm hopping around, but that game at Anderson, Indiana, we ended up winning. And that Anderson team we played on the road in their gym. They were the number one ranked team in Indiana, and they were in the top 5 in the country at that time in '93, and we upset them. You see, but the names that they called us during the game, and they were quiet later since then. So it's just that kind of dynamic we have. Like I said, black going into white spaces, we had to go on a road in the hostile conditions, snowstorm, the bad equipment, the old Boston Garden where the showers can't even work. We had to go play under these obscure conditions and expect to yield the same results on a chart of success that our white counterparts are. And
as you're talking about this, Salaam, I'm looking at your Colin Kaepernick t-shirt and thinking about when you're playing this game, it was long before Colin said, I'm going to take a knee and demand some respect in the right places. And I also, as you've been talking, I can see this, especially when you talked about the white savior. When I lived in Asia, and all the non-governmental organizations would come from all over Europe and try to help all of the local brown-skinned people. And so the question was, how do we help without reinforcing the oppression? Because there's a certain way of helping that makes the person you're helping feel disempowered. Instead of teaching them to fish, to give the fish, and then it makes them feel like either they can't do the fishing themselves, or the white people don't think that they're smart enough to figure it out for themselves. And so there's, in that whole non-governmental organization, the NGO world, there are all these discussions about do we even have a right to put our nose in and tell these people? And some of it is white guilt of trying to undo years of colonial oppression and all of that. But some of it I can also relate to, because when I lived in Sri Lanka, and maybe this is a good thing for all young people to do, go to a country where your skin color is not the dominant skin color.
Right.
Because I stood out like a sore thumb most places, because I was living where the locals lived. I could go into the city where there were more white people around, but I lived in the suburbs. And so, sometimes people would come knocking on my door. Actually, one time, and the guy said, I I couldn't find your house, so I asked the neighbors where the white lady lives, and they told me that you live there. So it was like the flip side of standing out, but because the British and the Dutch and the Portuguese had colonized, and they were the people with power, even though I stood out, I wasn't oppressed by it.
Right.
I wasn't assumed to be necessarily less than. In some circumstances, I was, that I didn't understand the culture or, things like that. But for the most part, I was not treated badly. I just stood out.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
a lot of what you're saying is human condition that is the same in different contexts around the world. It's not to take away from what you said, but just to try to relate from another perspective, because I think the more of these conversations that we can have and try different angles of understanding, the closer we get to finding that middle space where everybody feels safe to come and talk,
Right.
and then are free to go back to where they feel comfortable and safe. So
absolutely,
I think that's kind of where what you've been sharing with us is pointing to, as far as why does it have to be a white space that Black people are entering? Why isn't there? Where do we create this middle space where everybody feels safe?
Well, and I'm wondering if there's a role for churches
right,
or the mob. Right.
Because Malcolm X did say that the most segregated place that you'll find is at Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. That's the most segregated hour that you ever find.
Yes, I think I heard that or read it somewhere. Yeah.
But there again, like, do you want to worship with people who are just tolerating your presence? Or do you want to go where you're celebrated by the people you're with and can freely express who you are fully without feeling like you need to tone it down because it'll put somebody else off or scare them or overwhelm them,
Right.
So I think there's room
it's just
for
a matter
both.
of just being.
It's
just a matter of just being. I mean, because like even like I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's just a happening thing. That even when we've gone to the center, and I've had someone who was white like come up to me. This happened a couple of times actually. I didn't take any offense to it, but I just I thought it was interesting. And they said, "Hi, have you been here before?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And so, do you know Reverend Mike? I said, "Yeah, I've known him for over 5.5 years." And she, "I haven't seen you before," but I said, "Well, you don't really find what you're not looking for." you don't really find it. I'm kind of hard to miss. I mean, 6'7" guy in there.
Well, you probably don't sit in the front row because you'd block the view for short people like myself. That's why I sit in the second row, because nobody's in front of me.
Well, and there's also the if you come on different Sundays, right? So I mean, we have folks in the 9 o'clock service who've never met folks in the 10:30 service.
True.
Yeah, like silos.
Right. So of course, in these days, there's neither one. So
that's right.
Nobody's meeting anybody right now.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I didn't think anything of it, but it's just the angle is that if I haven't seen you, that you must not. It's not because you must haven't come. I mean, but it could be equally as responsible as you just wasn't checking for me, or looking at us. That's fine too, But but we were very well present.
You're also kind of pointing to the fact that you need to have a unique skill set when you move into white spaces.
You do.
White folks don't have to. Well, that's not quite so. I mean, if you're introverted, then you have to learn how to be extroverted around strangers. But it's different. And so I appreciate that you keep coming around, and
of course,
and that you even bring your kids there. So that's always a good sign. And
Yes, appreciate it. I mean, it's always like it's because when you show up to these spaces, okay, like I don't know if a white like we have these sayings that you see it in jest saying, well, if a white person expresses some type of woke sentiment, then they'll say, well, oh, so and so is invited to the cookout, or you hear that said in jest amongst black people, like, yeah, we'll have that person for, invited to the cookout, but here you can have Candace Owens, we don't want her, that kind of thing. So you see those kind of personality exchanges, if you will. But
yeah,
at the same time, it's all a big challenge. I mean, like to your point earlier, Malayna, what you were saying about like being empowered. I mean, well, we're finding that out even during the point of election and during the season of it. And you're even regardless of what your choice is that you see a lot of finger wagging happen where you're supposed to vote for so and so because historically that's what your ancestors pay you the price for with their life. I said I would like to think that my ancestors paid the price for us to just have some modicum of basic humanity. Let's start with that first. I mean, but and not to make it political, but I just say that just to show that how much. A lot of times a critical thinking approach is not really welcome in places where it's advantageous to the power structure to keep folks thinking homogeneously, and they
Right.
don't want room for the heterogeneity of thought, if you will.
Right.
So you knew what I was trying to say, right?
Yeah. And I applaud you for keeping saying it until you got that
I
word
got
out.
it.
really call it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are some closing thoughts as we pass the 1 hour mark? Look, I'll share this new little trick. Let's see if I can share the banner. So it's show. Ooh, it says moving forward, but it looks like
Look at
it's
that.
moving backward.
No, I
That's
like
how
that.
life feels right now.
It's like a little ticker.
Yeah, I wonder if I could change the direction. I
Maybe
don't know.
one day, as the talk goes on, maybe it'll have a recap of something enlightening that Reverend Mike said will come across, or something enlightening that you may have said, well, like they come across there.
Yes,
So
we'll have to
we'll play
pay
with that.
closer attention. I'm trying to get it to change directions, but it won't do it. So, Reverend Mike, would you like to do the tying a bow on the talk?
Well, I just appreciate that, we keep coming together and having these conversations. It's enlightening for me hearing what growing up on an Air Force base. What I guess my takeaway is I have an almost naive understanding of quote unquote race relations. Because I don't think I've really understood that growing up in the service, we had a safe environment to come up together, right? So that's why I was asking you a thing about safety, because I think part of the reason, why I feel comfortable most of the time around people of color is because I grew up knowing people of color, right? And they knew me. And they were welcome in our house and I was welcome in theirs. But I'm seeing now, as you're sharing more of your story, what a unique experience that was. And really, I suppose a blessing. So, and what I know is that we can, in fact, build a community where we can live like that, because we experience, and that doesn't mean it was the 70s. It doesn't mean that there wasn't stuff going on. But the military did do a pretty good job of, again, trying to create space or they had this place called the Rap House on base, where the airmen could get together and try and work this stuff out. In fact, I remember, maybe you can relate to this, one of the earliest things they worked out was that African American men in the service, the airmen, could let their beards grow, because one of the issues that they had with in the service, of course, you had to be clean shaven, was skin irritation. So that was something that, at least on our base, that came out of those talks, which is maybe kind of a simple thing, but my point is that it's kind of a demonstration of when you get people together and you talk about things that are important to them, then you can create a space for a solution. So I guess that's my takeaway today.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and that includes anybody watching. And stay tuned for more thoughts on talks, and we'll see you next time.
Bye now.
Right.
Thank you, Malayna. Thank you, Rev. To see you all next week or next couple weeks.
Thank you, Salaam and Reverend Mike.
Welcome.
Okay, bye.
I was
Bye-bye.